Well, good morning and welcome back to St Anne's in Higher Openshaw. Today I'd like to do something a little different. I have asked Mark Paver, who is one of our parishioners, to explain about his vocation. Mark is currently studying for the priesthood in the American College in Rome. Mark has lived and worked for quite a number of years in America, and I thought it might be an interesting thing for us to be able to listen to another vocation story. As I said in my own podcast a while back, that every priest has his own story. And so I caught up with Mark yesterday. So this is a pre-record that Mark did for me yesterday. He's due to go back to college tomorrow. So I asked Mark if he'd spare us a few minutes to put down on tape his own story. So it's now over to you, Mark.
I'm Mark Paver, parishioner of the parish of St Anne's in Higher Openshaw, where I grew up and attended primary school here in the Manchester area. I'm a seminarian now for the Archdiocese of New York in the United States, and I've been asked to briefly explain, or try to explain as best I can, the background to my own vocation. So, as I said, I went to primary school here in St Anne's Parish, and then to secondary school in St Thomas More in Denton, Manchester. And then after that I went to Severian College in Rusholme, Manchester. So I had Catholic education up to the age of 18. Then I went on to university in Sheffield, studied law, and eventually began working for a large accountancy firm in Manchester. And that career, that job presented various opportunities, one of which ultimately led me to go to work in New York in the United States in the field of forensic accounting. I moved there in 2003 and worked there for around about 6 years, living and working in Manhattan. So, being in New York and working in accounting, while it was very exciting at that time in my life, accounting itself had never really seemed like the career I wanted to do forever. And after living in New York for a while, I started to realize it wasn't going to give me fulfillment in life. In fact, I'd always thought at some stage I would eventually change my career to do something slightly different, something that perhaps had more of an impact directly on people's lives. At one point, because of my law degree, I'd considered changing to law, perhaps working in an area such as family law. I'd also considered teaching and other types of careers where there'd be more of a direct relationship between myself and the people and people out there. And in this sort of time period in New York, when I'd started to realize that perhaps I needed to be looking at a different career, the idea of the priesthood came to me quite strongly. There is some background to this. Obviously, as I said, I grew up in a Catholic education. I grew up in a Catholic family, and I have an uncle who's a priest. And as a child, I was always surrounded by priests through what was a close relationship with my uncle. And so I knew the types of lives that priests led, and I knew the good impact that they can have in people's lives. As a child and a teenager, and even in early adulthood, the idea of the priesthood did come into my mind, but I'd never really taken a serious step to look at the concept or the idea more seriously, obviously faced with the same types of questions that many people are faced with when they see someone who takes a step towards a vocation to the priesthood. It seems such a radical step, and in so many ways counter to the messages that we get from society. And so in a sense, I suppose I put it to the back of my mind and never really went back to it. Then in these years in New York, I started to think about it much more seriously. I was in an environment, I was in a parish in New York, and I'd begun to feel a connection to the parish, a connection to the priest there. And also, I'd really noticed that I was enjoying going to Mass, perhaps for the first time in my life. Mass had become kind of the highlight of one of the highlights, certainly if not the highlight of my week. I would never miss the Mass. It was always Sunday evenings. It's one of the latest Masses in the city, actually, at 8 p.m. on a Sunday. And the priest preaching, perhaps, was something that had attracted me. And so, during this time, and during the time of, I guess, trying to find the direction I wanted my life to go, it really became a point of almost, it felt such a crucial decision that I needed to make in my life of whether or not the priesthood was something that the Lord was calling me to. And I think once I had recognized that as something that needed to be addressed, the process kind of took over in a way. The story does get complicated, but essentially I was put in contact with the Director of Vocations from the Archdiocese of New York, and he put me in contact with a priest who I spoke to over a period of time. And during those conversations, we reached the decision together, I suppose, that really to take this forward and to reach a degree of certainty which was necessary one way or the other in my life, it was important to enter into a serious process which in the field of vocations is called a discernment process. And ultimately that led me to enter the seminary in the summer of 2009. It was probably 18 months from the point I originally got in contact with the Director of Vocations. So there it was. I began seminary in the New York Archdiocese in 2009, and after 2 years in their philosophy program, they asked me to transfer to the North American College in Rome to study theology. And that's where I've been for the past year and a half, studying theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University. I'm lucky enough to have a house full of over 250 seminarians from the United States with me, and then just down the road, a good group of guys from the Venerable English College as well, so I'm never too far from home. I'm also lucky to be able to come home, one of the few from the North American College who can go home on a fairly regular basis and visit my family and come back here to St. Anne's in Higher Openshaw and always find a welcome parish for me too.
Well, thanks for that, Mark. Last year, I think it was April last year, maybe May, we were privileged to take 32 people on pilgrimage to Rome. And Mark was able to facilitate a trip into the American College there. And we had the grand guided tour. And then we finished our day with them by celebrating and praying evening prayer. It was a beautiful thing to see so many young men studying for the priesthood there. And one or two people had said after we got back that the trip to the American College was actually the highlight of the whole trip. And that was quite an accolade, I thought. They just thought that it was a beautiful atmosphere within the college. Having had a look around the American College, it is a beautiful place. They have fantastic facilities there, which isn't quite what I remember from my own days at Ushaw. But nevertheless, the church moves forward and the church moves on. Perhaps one of the things that I would like to ask is that all our listeners perhaps offer a wee prayer for Mark Paver and for all the students in the American College, and indeed all the students who are preparing for a life in the priesthood. It is a difficult life, and the students and priests need your prayers. I would also ask as well if there is anyone out there who is listening who perhaps has considered a life of vocation to the priesthood or indeed the religious life, please listen to what God is asking of you and try and open your hearts and respond to him. It's one of the most difficult things to take that first tentative step. And I thought it was very interesting what Mark said about, the reaction of people around him who thought that it was quite a radical step and that it was something which is so outside of what, society is normally telling us to do. But perhaps, we need to make that radical step. So my prayer is for you that perhaps you would listen to what God is saying and to respond to him. And I ask all of you out there to please say a prayer for all our students and indeed for our priests. So I hope you've enjoyed Mark's little explanation of his own vocation story. And that's it for now. As I said at the beginning, slightly different to what I've been doing. It's nice to get somebody else's voice on the podcast, and I will be doing that more and more as the new year continues. So, thanks again for tuning in, and God bless you all. Until next time.